Okay. That was very exciting stuff. I'm in a room here clearly with a very experienced technology person, room full of CTOs and CIOs and so forth. I'm what you would call an LTO, the least technical officer in the room. And what I'm here to talk to you about is what directors know and what directors do not know about this problem of cybercrime. In truth, my overall aim is to talk about the disconnect between people, not just IT people, but people in large, complex organisations because of the pressure they're under every single day of the week, because of the pace of change, because of the operational silos within which that they operate in, and because of the complexity of those organisations. Most senior people, CEOs in particular, spend, let's say, 80% of their time working on business as usual, 20% of their time on new developments, another 50% of the time on shocks and surprises. Now, not bad at mathematics, that's 150%. It's one of the reasons why senior people, when you meet with them, glaze over very, very easily, very, very quickly, unless you're crisp and concise and on message with something that is germane to them in that moment and in that day. What I want to do consequently is to share with people how they can communicate their message beyond the boardroom door, and doing it in a manner which really influences the way in which organisations are managed, given the tsunami of risks that are facing us. I don't have very many slides. We don't sell products. We trade on experience and knowledge and contacts and things like that. And because we're all human beings, you know, we find it easier to look at other people's mistakes, other people's failures, before we could recognise our own. I thought it might be a good idea just to look at other issues, other things that have happened over the last number of years to help us understand and compare where we're at today as people on the defence side of this problem. What am I looking at here? At a board level in organisations, what you'll find is that, you know, the strapline, the Jimmy Maguire programme, Show Me the Money, that's a strapline which really kicks in the days and the hours after a major corporate event. When the stock has tanked out, when the cash is under pressure, the regulators are banging on the door, and customers don't quite know whether or not they can do business with you. Now, I'm not talking here about Irish banks or things like that. I'm talking here about problems that have been going on for the last decades, 40 and 50 years. Back in 1993, I think it was, a young PhD student called Deborah Pretty, working under Dr. Rory Knight in Oxford University, undertook a study called The Impact of Catastrophe on Shareholder Value. A seminal piece of work, and referred to still to this day. And she studied physical disasters, air crashes, product contamination, floods, or not floods we say, but oil spillages and things like that. And cyber clearly back in those days wasn't as germane as it is today. And what Deborah came up with were 5 telltale signs of helping people to differentiate between what we call recoverers and non-recoverers. You can detect recoverers and non-recoverers in the days and the moments after a major event, be it a cyber event or any event. The first one is fatalities, and I suppose in the context of cyber, that would extend to impacts on large communities, thousands and millions of customers and so forth. The second is the extent of the impact on stock value on a given day, the impact on cash. And then the fourth and fifth are very significant. One is management's responsibility, management's culpability in the period leading up to the event when it occurred. And then finally, management's talent in dealing with the circumstances they find themselves in. Now, there have been a number of other very, very noteworthy studies, and people find this very interesting. Going back to the late 90s, early 2000s, we had 2 studies in particular that were done on why do companies fail. Is it because of strategic risks? Is it operational risks, financial risks, hazard risks, that is to say, insurance type risks? What do we find? In over 90% of cases, companies fail by dint of some issue attaching to strategic risks and operational risks. Now, the operational risk space is a space that we're interested in here because this is the space that relates to the disconnect between people. something happens of a systemic nature across organisations. If I just explain a couple of them to you. Let's say you've got an organisation, it is international, it is multinational, it needs to be compliant with Sarbanes-Oxley, with the UK Anti-Bribery Act, and it's making investments in overseas markets. Let's imagine a person who is the director of EMEA, Europe, Middle East and Asia. That person has to make an investment. The board wants to be satisfied that the business, the company they're doing business with, the people in that company are people of high integrity, people they can trust. And that person does what we call an advanced due diligence. The kind of report you will get back on a person like that in a Middle Eastern country, in an Asian country might be, well, the individual concerned in relative terms is a clean fish, but that clean fish is swimming in, let's call it a dirty pond. Now, what does that EMEA director do? In one particular instance, not so long ago, I'm aware of a case where that person said, look, we need policies, we need procedures. I need to be able to train our folk out on the ground and how to detect, how to respond to events if they occur, to an offer, to basically a bribe. That person goes back to their chief compliance officer, their head of internal audit, to be told, we have the policies in place. We have the procedures in place. So why are you coming to us? What's the problem? There you have an instance, and it happens quite frequently, where the people fairly close to the coalface go back to their organisations and ask, what do I do? It's an example of what we would call in RMI mile wide, inch thick policies and procedures, because policy without practice has no teeth. Now, the takeaway here is, did you ever notice that after something goes wrong in a company, did you ever notice how, the press, the Times, the Financial Times, the Business Post can capture in just 3 to 5 minutes, or 3 to 5 column inches, what went wrong, why it went wrong, and who was responsible? The little story I gave it there is a real story, and it's an example of a company that felt it was in full compliance with an issue, but in fact it was fully negligent. Because when an event occurs, people look very, very silly. I remember back in, I think it was 96, we ran an organisation for a Fortune class company. It took months upon months to get the exercise organised. We had people from the States, executive VPs, right around the world. There were two halves of the exercise: the easy stuff, escalating from an emergency to an incident to a corporate crisis, and the functional stuff in the early part of the day went along swimmingly well, as nearly always. But then in the afternoon, people started to present the status reports, impact on cash, back office, procurement, supply chain in particular, and the whole thing fell asunder. Senior people, I'm talking here now about what directors know and don't know. Senior people did not understand their roles. If you think about it, senior people aren't career people in companies. We've gone past the day of a job for life. They're in an organisation for 3 or 5 or 10 years at most. They don't know the moving parts of the organisation. The European Director of Regulatory Affairs in that instance said, you know something? I've been writing reports for the last couple of years. We've made some massive assumptions with regards to spare capacity in facilities in other parts of the world. However, we have forgotten. It doesn't have FDA approval. It doesn't have customs clearances and so forth. In that particular instance, that organisation found that in the conduct of a scenario planning exercise, that they had made a massive mistake. Now, the takeaway here is that fact is stranger than fiction. And actually, the takeaway here as well is finding the person who knows the one thing that will stop you in your tracks and cause you to fundamentally reassess your defences. That's another example and another instance of, mile-wide, inch-thick defences in an organisation. Now, we're all actors. We're all very small actors here as private citizens in what we experienced recently in 2008, the global financial crisis. All of the companies that failed in 2008, all of the banks that froze and are still frozen, not just talking about the Irish banks, the really big players the global banks, they were all using proven and accepted risk management systems and models. All of those systems and models, in fact, were useless. They were useless then, and they were useless today. That's a very, very big statement. How can I make such a statement? Well, in fact, the systems and the models they were using were fine for the management of financial risks, but they were totally wrong for the management of strategic risks, right? The worrying thing and the awful thing is that they're still being used today because people do not understand what else they can use. They're, as I think Richard said at the moment, we haven't had the moment in the event in risk management terms where we've cracked it, right? Chief risk officers back in those days were asked by their boards of directors, can we take these risks? We're entering into an era of a new paradigm, tsunami of money, cheap credit, and so forth. And the CROs said, well, if you give us more budget, we'll hire more people, better mathematicians, and yes, we'll be able to take risks more safely. The CROs, rather than telling the boards how good they were, right, rather than telling the boards how worried they were, told the boards that yes, we can take these risks safely. So the takeaway here again, it's another example of mile-wide, inch-thick policies and procedures. But the question I have here is, we have the global financial crisis, the chief risk officers who failed back in those days. We have the chief compliance officer in a company who says, we have all the policies and procedures, yet the people on the coalface don't know about them. We had the company, global operation, that had fundamental information. It's what we call a known unknown risk. The guy who knew the one thing down here, the information was not being communicated to the directors at a higher level. How many people do we have, do you think, in this room who fall into the same category? How many people are telling their directors and their senior managers how good they are, as opposed to how worried they are? I'm kind of mindful just now of a guy who's a politician, an Irish politician today, who was once a terrorist, and is attributed with a statement that they, meaning the British government, had to be lucky all of the time. We only have to be lucky once. And the bottom line is that, nobody is lucky all of the time. And people need to think of the adversaries. The people, and I think Paul gave an outstanding presentation there in the context of the pace of change, the diversity, the entrepreneurs that are out there on the other side, these criminals. And what we find is that whenever we respond to an incident, it's quite interesting. We find that at the director level, at the very, very senior levels, you've got shock and surprise. But at the operational levels, at the specialist levels, yes, there's shock. There is shock that something happened today, but there really isn't all that much surprise. What I'm here to tell you is that what some of the smart guys in town are doing. The smart guys in town are telling people, their senior managers and their boards of directors, that cybercrime, cyber threats, is not an IT issue. It's a board level issue. It's something which needs to be sponsored at board level in a very functional, very practical way. It's something which needs to be owned at the business level, not the IT level. Why? Why is this the case? It is really very simple. You need to understand this. The pace at which the adversaries, the criminals, are changing their game. I mean, Paul's presentation has changed quite significantly from last December and November when we spoke together to what we have here today. And what happens is that the higher the level of uncertainty that you have in an organisation with regards to the critical organs of your business, the higher the level of uncertainty, the higher up in the organisation that it needs to be considered and managed. You've got what we would call an automatic governance event. Fundamental uncertainty. And remember now again, the title of my talk is on what directors know and don't know about cybercrime. When a director of a company is told that there is a material uncertainty or a fundamental uncertainty as to the protection of a vital organ of the business or the business model, right, he automatically is accountable. Fundamental uncertainty equals board accountability. We're concerned in RMI that boards of directors simply do not understand. They don't understand because people in our space, the defenders, right, are asking for more budget, DDoS mitigation, firewalls, viruses, and so forth. And of course, people feel constrained, saying, yes, thanks for the money, and things have improved. Our defences have improved. The reality is that we're maybe not telling our boards of directors that of our worries, of the changes that are taking place, how what we thought was adequate yesterday is not adequate today. Boards of directors need, ladies and gentlemen, boards of directors need to get the bad news first. The bad news. Not the good news, the bad news. But the one thing they don't need is, they don't need surprises. Don't need surprises. If you allow your board of directors, your senior managers, to live in an environment where they've got a sense of security, right? Everything is okay. The guys at the thick end of the fight have it covered. You, in fact, are setting up your company for a fall, for a big shock and surprise. And professionally, any of us that do that type of thing are also putting ourselves professionally at risk. Bottom line really here is, and the takeaway is, shock is okay. We can be shocked that things happened today in the way it happened, but surprise is not okay. Make sure that the senior folk in your organisations, if you're the one guy or the one girl that knows something, it's your responsibility to communicate that information up to the right people. We're concerned that managements are nervous. So we have boards that are, quite frankly, ignorant. They don't understand cyber threats and cyber crimes. They shouldn't be expected to. But we have managements that are nervous. We're concerned that a lot of CTO folk are more concerned, they're looking down on their IT function. They're not looking out. They're not looking at the safety of information, the safety of business processes across the entire organisation. And that, broadly speaking, IT folk fall into kind of two categories. The smallest category are the folk who are in denial. There's nobody could be in denial here today on foot of Paul's presentation and the particular presentations that are yet to come. The other category then are folk who are just under-resourced and over-challenged. I posted a blog recently on the task force website, and I think it's one of the most popular blogs still. And I think the question that I asked, the discussion I started, maybe some of you were involved in the discussion, was, do board of directors understand cyber threats? Do they understand cyber threats? And the responses that I got were quite interesting. They were not a surprise to me. They said that effectively, for most folk in the IT space, the boardroom is impenetrable for IT people. And this consensus kind of reminds me of, the global financial crisis. The CROs, that is the CROs who are responsible, we say, for the credit risk in banks. I think that those people have a lot to answer for, certainly. But those people still today, I think, are T-boys and T-girls to the boards of directors. That's another very big statement. That's an audacious statement. How can I say that with the tens of millions being spent in individual companies? Well, what were the dogs in the streets? And again, I'm trying to relate this. What can we learn from that in our context here? What were the dogs in the streets talking about in those days? They were talking about the wall of information, the wall of the tsunami of money hitting all the major economies at the same time. Okay? They were talking about the property bubbles in the US and in the developed world. Now, in 5 years' time, if I could just imagine myself going forward 5 years, what do I think the dogs in the streets will be talking about today in the context of cyber? I think they'd be saying, the major event, all the major attacks that are taking place, they're all blurring one into the other. They're all blurring one into the other. There was a time when you would have a major event in a given 6-month period or a quarter, but now they're blurring one into the other. The lessons that we can learn relate to, first and foremost, seeing the elephant in the room. The bottom line is that a thing called VAR, right, value at risk, was fine for the management of certain types of risks in the banking sector, but they were not fine for managing the fabric of the entities that they were there to protect in the first place. An elephant is something like, for example, the Lehman's board. The Lehman's board had 9 retired directors 4 of them were over 75 years of age. One of them was a theatre producer. One of them was a Navy commander, and only two had direct experience in the financial services sector. That's an example, right, of an elephant. Now, I'm sharing the example with you because I'm asking you to think of yourselves, think of your own organisations relative to the threats that are being, that you already know exist, and the information we're getting here today. People need to spend time understanding the adversaries, how they're changing and adapting, and their pace of change. You need to socialise issues with a thing called the 7 key constituencies. In a moment now, I'm going to show a little table. It's a table that is true for every organisation, an NGO, financial services company, a commercial company, a manufacturing company. The same type of constituencies exist, but they've all got different concerns and assurance requirements, which I'm going to explain to you in a moment. Because you see, we think that cybercrime assurance are like the roots of a tree. Do you know when at winter time you're looking at your news reports and you see all these trees that fall over on the road? They're mostly kind of beech trees, right? The roots are very broad, but in fact they don't go down very far. They don't go down very far. We need to be working more in the context of oak trees, where the roots are broad but they go down deeply. Why do I say that? What kind of analogy is that? Well, first and foremost, we're talking here about big and basic questioning. Big and basic questioning. And the second is then deep and intelligent interrogation of the answers that we're being provided with. So here's the first table. We have the board, senior management, risk management, information technology, operational management, audit and compliance. Now, the interesting thing here is that if you just look at the concerns there, for example, at a board level, do we have an effective solution in place to protect the business? Okay. What assurance does the board require? It requires regular statements providing independent attestation. Senior management, are the solutions we have in place effective and are they economic? The assurance that would come there perhaps would be regular proofing and rehearsal of incident management capability. Operational management, do we have effective responses to attacks and can we operate 24/7? And the assurance required there is proofing exercises with staff to establish ability and volume impacts. Now, question. Who is providing the assurance in your organisations today? Who's providing that assurance to each of those 7 constituents? Now, I'm a former military man, so I would say yes, all the guns are pointing in the same direction. Because all those concerns that are there are all they're all aligned. They're all pointing towards, in the context of cybercrime, the threats and the risks that it presents. But what assurances are being provided and who's providing them across the organisation? That's a critical question. Let's just take for a moment, we'll say the board. The board says, okay, no problem. We're going to get some vendor or consultant who's going to produce a bit of paper that says you've got all the paperwork in place. But what really are we looking for? Are we looking for attestation that the paperwork is right and things are done? Who is determining within the organisation what scenarios we're testing against? Is it the people, for example, that design the systems and know the limitations? Or is it the people, for example, that know the one thing? Who knows that one thing? That's very important. That is very, very important. And again, I'd re-emphasise, don't provide a false sense of security to your boards of directors. Because if you do that, you're setting up the company for a fall. You're not going to be able to respond, and clearly it's threatening to yourselves as professionals. Senior management. Senior management, for example, require regular proofing and rehearsal of incident management capability. Okay, so what's the most important word there? Regular proofing and rehearsal of incident management capability. I think the most important word there is regular. Because the question I would ask is, how regular is regular? Now, some time ago at the ERCOM conference and a prior one for the Sunday Business Post, I spoke about strategy, the art of the general, right? And in fact, if you go to the RMI website, rmi.ie, you'll see quite a number of little video clips up there, 3-minute and 5-minute video clips, well worth a look. Because when we walk into an organisation, yes, there are 10 lever arch files on the table, but every organisation, or most organisations we go into, what is their favourite crisis management plan? It's this one, the blank sheet of paper. The blank sheet of paper. Because the ferocity, whether it's just, a regulator coming in and you've got a dawn raid, that could be a crisis for a lot of organisations. Getting the 10 lever arch files down to one page, something like that, right? Something like that is proof that you've thought things through. But something like that document there, right, and I can't give you a full visual because it's a real one, can take about 18 months to a couple of years to develop. Why? Because you see, within the 10 lever arch files, there's great cover, right? But when you put something down on a bit of paper that says, you are responsible for this, you report to that person, in the first hour you will do this, in the 5th hour you will do the other, and so forth. That's very, very threatening for people, and they don't like it. And in that earlier, in one of those video clips, I've spoken about the importance of organisations conducting scenario tests as part of their mainstream business activity. You don't need consultants. You don't need consultants to do it. You need to be looking at impacts on production, cash, operations, business processes, and so forth. I'll talk for a moment there about risk management. How many folk here know what a risk register is? Hands up. Well, that's great, quite a number. So I don't know, are you coming from an IT background or risk or whatever? But as you know, a risk register is something which is a bit like a balance sheet, assets and liabilities. There's the risk assessment half and there's the risk treatments half. By and large, in our experience, the risk assessment half is the best bit. All the risks are identified, people calculate the likelihoods through various methods and so forth, and they can rank and score their risks. But the bit, quite often, that is very gappy is the risk treatment side. Quite often, the bits that are best populated are those to do with IT, because IT knows what it needs to do to defend IT systems and so forth. But there's very little overlap and engagement from business. In other words, people on the business lines doing particular things within particular timeframes, independently attested, such that we know, yes, we can improve the risk, we can get it from the red down into the amber, right, if we do the following things. The problem with risk management in lots of organisations is that risk management is staffed and led by people who, a lot of them come from internal audit, right? Internal audit and audit is like driving a car looking through the kind of the rear view mirror, right? It's all about confirming that what we did yesterday and last year was right. It's all about making sure that the historic financial information is correct, it stacks up, it can be trusted. But the reality is that risk management is about, I want to get from point A to point B. What are the things that can stop me, throw me offline, distract me in getting from point A to point B? That's what risk management is about. Now, in the case of information technology, IT, the assurance required there is continuous cyber threat assessment and risk analysis with prioritised remediation programs. Now, threat assessment and risk analysis, people need to understand there is a kind of a nuance. There's some nuances and difference between threat assessment and risk analysis. Again, there's a 2-minute clip in one of the video clips on the RMI website there for you to understand those nuances. We wouldn't expect you to know the detail, but you have to understand there are differences, right? Half the battle if you understand those differences and the nuances and so forth. The question I would have for people, when you're doing the risk analysis, how involved are you in the conduct of business impact analysis? How involved is IT in the conduct of business impact analysis? Why is this important? Well, in fact, business impact analysis is all about the business. It's not about IT. It's about the business. And when you are deeply involved in the conduct of business impact analysis, this is where you get first sight of the threats and the risks to the vital organs of the business. This is where you begin to get the ammunition that will help you to communicate, to socialise the issues, share your concerns, because now you're not talking about IT, You're talking about the business, right? And if I was to advise people on what one thing they should take away, at least certainly from my presentation to you this morning, it is, if you're not intrinsically involved, or at least comprehensively involved in the conduct of business impact analysis in your organisations, find a way to get involved, because you will get the information, the business information, that will allow you to begin to communicate in language that senior people understand. So what's my point here? This table here, and I think Michael Baum is going to refer to this table later on in the afternoon. I'm talking here about the 7 key constituencies. They've got 7 different types of concerns. They've got 7 different types of assurances. Now, the question you should have is, am I involved, or who is involved in addressing the range of assurances within the organisation here? Do we have beech trees, mile-wide, inch-thick cover, or do we have big and basic questioning with, deep and intelligent interrogation of the answers? That really is the question here. Now, some more questions that are perhaps more germane to IT specifically. And Michael in the afternoon will be talking about mapping risks, designing your responses, and communicating those to the board. Here's an example of some of the big and basic questions which we believe that people should be asking of themselves. For example, do we follow attack developments, and are we aware of current trends, and so forth? Okay, so you've come along to the conference here today. You've heard what Paul has had to say. You're going to hear what other folk, specialists in the cyberspace, have had to say. Are you informed? Is getting bulletins and reading news articles and so forth, is that being informed? I'm conscious that Michael, when he was CIO in AIB Group, founded the High-Tech Crime Forum for the banking sector. That didn't happen overnight. Banks that were competitors in the marketplace either to come together to share information, near misses and worries. How many people here know or have some way of, or getting some feed of information that's germane to at least their sector with regards to new threats, new risks that are out there and challenging you? There's one here. Have we assessed the extent of loss of information, or are you just assuming that the information is safe? So, okay, for example, you're a bank. DDoS mitigation, firewalls, viruses, all the things that Paul spoke about are important to you. However, when we conduct, we say, investigations, we don't do an investigation these days without an extensive digital and forensic aspect to it. One of the first things the guys will ask you for is your IT user policy. What do we find? Another example of mile-wide, inch-thick. We have a user policy. It's on the internet. It's in a folder, but it's not communicated out to the people with regards to their rights, access rights and privileges and so forth. What does that mean to us at a practical level? It means that information which we discover really has got more of an intelligence value than an evidential value. It also tells us something else. It tells us that people actually don't know where their key information assets are. Yes, you've got an inventory of your physical assets, but most people do not have an inventory of their key IP and their key documents. They know where it should be, but they don't know for sure where it actually is within the organisation. The last question there, for example, is a good one. Do we have a proven digital forensics capability in the event of an incident or suspicious activity? You do or you don't. A machine or a system that is part of or the subject of an attack or the theft of information, you've got to regard that system or that machine as what? As a crime scene. Now, we all probably kind of have watched kind of CSI and things like that, right? What we understand is there's a discipline attached to it. There's a forensic detail attached to it. If you allow your IT folk to start trampling all over the evidence, it's akin to letting the Keystone cops in to destroy your crime scene. You're not going to get a conviction. And by the way, the things that are most important then is data protection, civil liberties. Do you know where you can go? Do you know where the boundaries are, and so forth? So these are very, very practical questions that are germane to IT folk in the context of cybercrime assurance. What's the solution? Well, we would say there are four pillars or four legs, four pillars in cybercrime assurance. About 20 years ago, when we founded the company, we were in the special risk business. What's special risk? It's an insurance term. Kidnap, product contamination, and extortion. First time we encountered cyber as an issue in our organizations was when it began to appear in special risks insurance policies back in maybe 10, 11, 12 years ago. Now, the difference between cyber extortion as it was perceived back then and today is what? Today it's far more likely to happen. Ransomware and the likes. But before I go on, let me just tell you a little kind of a technique that we use in RMI to help us ascertain where an organisation is. We call it the tell me, show me, prove it to me rule. When you walk into an organisation and you ask them, how good are your defences? The first meeting, you're going to be told of all the defences that are in place. And you'd walk away saying, you know something? 8 out of 10, maybe even 9 out of 10. And then we go for the second meeting and we're getting closer to the folk at the coalface. And we're saying, we've been told what's in place. Would you show us now? Just give us, bring us through the system and things like that. What happens? 9 times out of 10, we're going from 8 or 9 out of 10 down to 6 or 7, even 5 out of 10, right? People don't even get past the show me part. And then, of course, it all falls asunder at the last bit, prove it to me. Lots of organisations don't want tests to be done by outsiders because folk who are the defenders feel that they're going to be found out. There are people who have been telling their boards how good they are, as distinct from explaining to their boards how worried they are. So the tell me, show me, prove it to me rule. 8 or 9 out of 10 to 6 or 7 out of 10 down to 2, 3 and 4 out of 10. Scenario testing is mission critical. The first pillar in cybercrime and cyber threat assurance is what we call TARA, threat assessment and risk analysis. And the key bit here that needs to be really understood, particularly by IT people, is the business impact analysis. It's where you get the beautiful information that allows you to converse at a business level with senior people. The second is scenario testing. But scenario testing, ladies and gentlemen, at the pace set by the adversaries, not at the pace that suits you internally and administratively. You need to be doing certain things across the enterprise every quarter in a non-complicated way. I've described in one of the video clips on rmi.ie how 45 minutes per quarter will yield outstanding results. What are you going to have? You're going to have disagreements, fundamental disagreements. You're going to have rows between folk in IT, line management, risk management, audit, and so forth. Little clue for you. Anytime you run an exercise that goes swimmingly well and there were no disputes and no rows, it was not a good exercise, right? The trick is to do these things at a minimum once a quarter in our view, within the security of the room, as distinct from out in front of your competitors and your customers and regulators. Program management. What do we mean by program management? If you get to the point where you remember the earlier slide there, I showed the 7 constituencies, 7 areas of concern, 7 levels of assurance and so forth. There's 7 different types of assurance. If you get to the point where you are centrally coordinating the risk treatments that are required to give those assurances across those 7 key constituencies, what's that mean? I can tell you now, that means that wherever you are in the classroom today, if you get to that point, you are moving up to or you are at the top of the class, because most organizations don't do it. And earlier on I spoke about, the title of my talk is what directors know and don't know. By and large, is the discussion really on the discontinuity between people in large organisations, because they're in different operational silos, pace of change, pressure on them and so forth. If you do all of that, you then get to the point in the context of crisis management whereby the directors of your company, really at a level, all they want to know is that they'll know what to do on the day. That's all a director of a company, particularly a non-executive director. They just want to know that they'll know what to do on the day. And you have to be able to say to them, we will know what we will have to do on the day. And if you follow our guidance, will know what you've got to do on the day. You're walking the talk if you've got competent business defence systems in place, if you have a process-driven and open culture where you are open to robust questioning, deep, remember the roots of the tree, deep, intelligent interrogation of all the answers being provided, and scenario testing at the pace set by adversaries, not at your internal administrative pace. To conclude, cybercrime is not an IT issue. It is a management issue. It is not a risk management issue. It is a business management issue. It needs to be addressed and managed, sponsored at the board level, but across the 7 key constituencies there that we referred to earlier on. Don't allow yourselves to get caught up in business as usual. Don't allow yourselves to spend 80% of your day administrating the proven and accepted systems and models and solutions that are out there. Spend as much time looking at what the adversaries are doing. Get involved in sector initiatives that allows you to share information, the kind of information that will only appear 6 months after, the kind of information that you will get 6 months before an event is reported. Talk business issues. Start with your threat assessment and risk analysis. Really get involved in business impact analysis. That's business talk. It's not IT talk. It's not cybercrime talk. It's business talk. Coordinate your risk treatments across the 7 constituencies in a centralised way. If you do all of that, then because we know we all can't be lucky all of the time, we will know what we are required to do on the day. It's not calculus. It's as simple and as practical as that. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.